Good evening and welcome to Normal Ireland Live. My name is Curtis Daly and I will be your host this evening. Now, some of you may have seen a bit of a backstage exclusive because some have come from a different channel. You know who that it is. So when I introduce this person, you probably would have seen her 5 minutes ago. I'm joined again by the all-knowing and fantastic Helena, aka No Justice MTG. Thank you for spending your Saturday night with me on the show.
It's good to be back. It's good to be back. I was a couple of weeks ago. Been away, come back and a bit tanned now. So all good to tuck into this week's politics.
Definitely sun-kissed. The skin is glowing. But let's get on to our first story. Adrian Ramsey, the co-leader of the Green Party, and Nigel Farage, leader of Reform, appeared on BBC Question Time special where they faced questions from the audience. Now, given that most of the time with Farage were questions surrounding the racist and homophobic Reform activists, we're covering that story separately. So we're going to skip Farage's Question Time segment and we're going to go straight to Adrian Ramsey. Here is his highlight reel.
What would we have to sacrifice to meet your pledges?
So in terms of what would people be sacrificing, well, I think it's about what people would be gaining, because at the moment, people can't get access to an NHS dentist. People can't get access to a GP when they need one. The hospitals are full of patients in corridors, and we have a climate and nature crisis that we're not getting to grips with. So what we're arguing is that we should put in the investment and ask the very richest in society, multimillionaires and billionaires, to put in modestly more.
Well, should we talk about some of the specifics? Because Graham's question is, what would we have to sacrifice to meet your pledges? So let's talk about cars, for example. Because obviously you would like us all to drive, all of us here to drive electric cars. And what you're suggesting is that everyone has to scrap their petrol and diesel cars by 2035.
Well, that's a good question, Fiona, and there does need to be...
I'm sure you'd like an answer.
There needs to be a scrappage scheme as part of any plan to move away from fossil fuel vehicles. And of course...
And have you costed for that? And how much would people expect to get?
Our manifesto is fully costed, and what I would say is that as part of a plan to say we have a date where no new fossil fuel vehicles come onto the road, of course, from then on, there'll still be lots of second-hand fossil fuel vehicles that people may buy.
You there, in your black and white shirt. Let's say you've got a petrol and diesel car. How much would you... What's your name?
Ryan.
Ryan, how much would you pay him for his petrol and diesel car?
I'm not sure I have that specific figure.
But then how do you know it's fully costed?
Well, because I can tell you about what the figures for our manifesto as a whole are seeking to achieve in terms of the transition to net zero.
You want to introduce a frequent flyer ban, a levy, and ban domestic flights that would take less than 3 hours by train.
It absolutely shouldn't be the case that it's more expensive to get the train, often substantially more expensive, isn't it, to get the train within the UK than it is to get a flight, and the flight is several times more environmentally damaging. And I think most people want to do the greener option, but the greener option's got to be the cheaper and more convenient option as well.
So how would you make it cheaper?
Well, at the moment, there are huge subsidies that go into the aviation industry, whilst we have some of the most expensive rail prices in Europe. And so one of the things we would do is to bring the railways back into public ownership, which I think people would really like to see, to ensure that they are run for public benefit, not for the huge profits of the rail companies.
I'm self-employed. I've seen increases in corporation tax, in dividend tax and a frozen personal allowance. And now you want to tax me even more. Why?
So you're suggesting raising tax for higher earners, but also removing the cap on national insurance, which obviously needs an increase in what people will pay, for those earning more than $50,270.
We're not proposing any changes to income tax. We are proposing asking those earning over $50,000 to pay a little bit more in national insurance, because people who earn under $50,000 currently pay a higher proportion of their salary on national insurance than people who earn over $50,000. And so we're talking about £5 extra a week for someone earning $55,000. Now, what would that get you? At the moment, people can't access an NHS dentist. And if you can afford to do so, you might be forking out for a private dentist. Well, how much does that cost you over a year? How much does it cost you over a year to pay extortionate train ticket prices because we're not investing in our railways, or to have to heat your home and see your bills going up and up every month because we've got the leakiest homes in Europe and we haven't insulated them? So we're setting out a different vision, Sonia, for where, yes, we ask those earning a little bit more to pay a little bit more, including the multimillionaires and billionaires, but it's about a different type of society, because we're the only party that's willing to say we should be willing to invest more in restoring our NHS and defending our environment. And if we have a group of Green MPs in Parliament after the election, we can push the new government to be bolder on the issues that we really need to address.
Thank you for enduring that fairly long clip, but it's quite hard to try and get a lot of political content into a short segment. But, you know, the last part of that clip from Ramsey I thought was really good. He essentially made the public versus private tax point, which is basically if you're earning over 50k, you may pay a little bit more, but that's not an income tax or national insurance. But think about what you could save. The extra tax could be used to invest. That would mean keeping rail prices from increasing or even cutting them, not being forced to go private because the NHS is there to, you know, for you to, and it's working properly. So you'll keep more of your wages. I think it's a good trade-off. Now, we will go into more specific clips, but Helena, I want to ask you how you feel about Ramsey's performance and whether you felt satisfied with some of his answers.
I actually thought that his interview style or his questioning style here was really improved upon other appearances that I've seen. I think he's really come on as a leader in his time in the role. I used to be pretty critical of him, didn't think he was a good performer, but this was a good performance. A lot of accepting of the audience's questions, taking what he would perceive to be their issues with some of their policies and then trying to overcome them by talking about mitigating circumstances or the utility in, you know, these choices that are being made, because of course all policy is about choice. You can't please everybody at the same time. I think his performance broadly was very good. All those answers on defence were the kind of answers we should have seen from Corbyn during that era, and he was a really passionate defender of things like tax and spend and of collective solutions rather than individual solutions to things like climate change and on the international problems that we have with how you deal with China and this canard that you hear all the time. When actually, if we want to be able to, you know, remove this export of emissions that we've got to China, we need to have more industry and more farming at home. The one answer I think that he did poorly on, I don't know if we'll be getting to this later, but there was a question about immigration specifically. And the answer, of course, is, well, what was the question, was specifically, how are we going to deal with the infrastructure that we need if we continue with your immigration policies? And the answer, of course, is easy. The taxpayers will use that money to fund it for infrastructure, right? But the argument was never made. The problem that we have is Nigel Farage wants to make it the immigration election. And the point that Andrew Fisher made is that Mike Bankole made is that we have kowtowed to right-wing narratives on what immigration does to our economy without properly making the positive case for these things. Now, we have a declining birth rate, we have a declining working age population, we're going to need these people to be able to staff the industries to pay for people's pensions. But the idea that somehow more immigrants here means fewer houses, we could just build more houses, we could have built council houses, and we haven't. And the real problem is that it's not immigrants that have caused the strain on the NHS or the strain on public services because of the increasing population, because it has increased. The problem that we have is the conservative austerity and their deliberate, their kind of ideological opposition to strong public services is why we haven't had the infrastructure catching up with the increase in population. And at no point in his answer, whereas he did make good answers on asylum, at no point in his answer did he actually make the positive economic case as to why immigration isn't just like, okay, it is necessary to keep our economy afloat. And no one's being honest about that fact in this election.
Yeah, I would like you to actually probably get into the immigration a bit more, because given that we had limited time, the immigration side wasn't included in these clips. So how do you think, I mean, well, you kind of just pretty much laid out how it would have been better handled, but what was his initial response when asked about immigration then?
So he said, well, you know, the people who they work in our industries, and I think this is obviously a good important point about immigration. We have skills gaps in our economy. We have labor gaps. We have staffing crises in many public sector, especially in the NHS, in social care, all of these places in the economy. And he was right to say, if you meet a migrant in the NHS, they're far more likely to be treating you than they are ahead of you in the queue. But people in the society that we have, they absolutely support immigration to fulfill skills vacancies. But that's not the same as being pro-immigration. Nigel Farage also supports, you know, immigration to be able to fill skills vacancies as long as it reaches closer to net zero migration, which is the Reform UK policy. But that's not the same as being pro-migration broadly, after taking a more libertarian approach to migration, because, you know, that's all true, but we can still have net zero migration and use migrants to fill skills gaps in the NHS. whereas people are worried about population increase happening to public sector. That was the specific question that he was asked, was how are we going to deal with it? What's this? I'm worried about the strain on public services. And he didn't bother assuaging those fears at all. And that was the real failure in the answer that he gave.
I mean, we've discussed, me and you, about immigration before, and I think we've pretty much we're on agreement when it comes to politically selling immigration, or the maintaining the current levels of immigration. I think we accept, as socialists, that it's a hard sell, and we're willing to compromise on that if it means we can get a radical economic program. So I guess this transcends Adrian Ramsey. This transcends the Green Party. Is the left even very good at talking about immigration? Do we, even though it's, I like hearing when people say immigration is brilliant for diversity, it's brilliant for culture. I personally like hearing that, but I don't think that's a very good argument to convince a lot of people. So I guess the left as a whole probably isn't very good at arguing about immigration. And if you agree with that, what do you think is a better way of trying to make a positive case for immigration differently to what we've been doing before?
I mean, the problem is, of course, is that most of the voices that have been pro-immigration is from the FVP, pro-EU liberal left, rather than from the socialist left, for example. And whilst I have my issues, I think the pros and cons of EU membership, we've discussed this at length before, and I'm not going to go over those points. They have been the leaders in this. And at no point have they talked about issues with regards to the impacts on communities, the impacts on public services. They've not talked about what's happened to the decline in manufacturing. The idea of immigrants stealing people's jobs actually probably really comes out of the idea that the jobs have disappeared and never come back in left-behind communities in the post-industrial Britain. Now, that's not an immigrant's fault that that's happened, but it was Thatcher and Blair transitioning to a service-based economy. But when you hear liberal people say, well, if you can't get a job because immigrants stole it, that means you need to go and skill yourself up. That's free market labour policy. That's Thatcherism that you're doing there. Because the liberal left, they're happy with Thatcherism. They're happy with free market economics, and they fully believe it. They're just far more socially progressive, and they value the cultural imports. And I do value those things too. But we need to, rather than thinking this, through a cultural lens and a positive, but we also need to disabuse people of the kind of broad kind of popular consensus on immigration with regards to infrastructure, as I mentioned before, and B, in terms of labour markets. I think broadly in this country, we still subscribe to this idea that immigrants are a reserve army of labour, and that only works in a closed system. I'm a real critic of reserve army of labour theory, because migrants come in and increase the size of the population, therefore increase demand. Like, the number of jobs in your economy isn't static. Companies aren't importing migrants to undercut you, because these people are also fighting in the same labour market that has expanded. And also, you can just, like, if you want to get rid of the problems with potential certain sectors might have their labour market diluted if certain sectors have higher level of immigration than others, have a trade union bargaining agreement. Deregulate our trade unions. In fact, regulate the economy so that unions are stronger, like they have in Scandinavian countries, where it's collective bargaining agreements. It doesn't matter how many immigrants come here in your sector if you're already protected by a bargaining agreement. But all of these things have been lost to the cosmopolitan liberal side of this argument, and the socialist left have not made this positive case.
Well, I feel like there's going to be a danger of not sound like an echo chamber. I completely agree. I think the big problem here is not necessarily trying to make a better argument for immigration, but talking about the class issue here. And obviously liberals don't particularly care about that. They don't care about the structural or class issues. They'll just say the sort of, let's be honest, the way that people see it is wishy-washy liberal, we love immigration. And I think it becomes quite reactionary, which, because you mentioned this, I think it was a tweet, or I've seen a couple of tweets about it, where it's like, if you can't get a job over a migrant, you need to skill your way out of it. And it's like, well, you do realise that plays into the exact narrative that the right says about the left. The problem here as well, because the liberals are getting lumped in with the left, we have a completely different analysis to that. We say, actually, we want jobs for all, whether you're an immigrant or not. Liberals are like, well, skill issue. And then the right are like, well, Brits only. So it's a failure of obviously the liberals and class issues, but obviously it's hard for us to get our voice out there when, let's be honest, the mainstream media will only go as left wing as pretty much the liberals, FBPE, whatever. But I don't want to get into immigration all night, even though we probably end up talking about it. So we are going to move on. We have another clip of an audience member questioning the Greens in regards to HS2, and this is Adrian's response.
I thought the Green Party were against HS2 and schemes like that, which is improving high-speed rail, so why were they against it?
So we want to see far more investment in public transport and in particular in improving regional and local connections here in the Midlands, in the north, in all parts of the country. We did have concerns about the huge cost and also the local environmental impact along the London to Birmingham route of the particular proposal for HS2. But that route's happening now, and what the government said is it's going to scrap the perhaps more helpful leg of HS2, which was going to be in the Midlands and in the north, and it said it'll put that money into regional and local transport networks for the Midlands, for the north, for the whole of the country, all of our regions. I'm in a region in East Anglia which is underinvested. I think probably you in the Midlands and in the north, Phil, your public transport's not been invested in. And my question to the government would be, it said it was going to invest that HS2 second leg money in local transport. Where's that happening? Have you seen the improvements to public transport where you are? I know I haven't. So we need to get that investment into local and regional rail services, into improving bus services, so that people do have that option for public transport wherever that's practical.
Helena, I mean, you and I both agree that HS2 is a good thing. It's obviously been mismanaged by the Tories. And I think it was a fair question from the audience member, since the Greens overall haven't been particularly keen on it. Do you think that was a satisfying answer from Adrian, or when it comes to the really big infrastructure projects, the Greens have just been really poor?
The answer was a good answer. Like, it said all things that I agree with, that, money should have been spent on upgrading local infrastructure. These are all good things. But the initial question that was part of this thread of questions was about their desire to ban short-haul flights within the UK if you can take it by train. And I'm like, you can take it by train if you had high-speed rail, right? China have built thousands of miles of high-speed rail. That's their source to be able to get people out of their cars, right? And I get the ecological concerns. So you want to build all this infrastructure, you want to get rid of all these habitats in these areas. I understand these problems, but these bat enclaves that might have to be moved to make way for HS2, which really doesn't take up that much space if you're not building millions of tunnels. Like, that's not going to be there if the planet burns to a crisp from climate change because we've not decarbonized fast enough, or the world hasn't decarbonized fast enough. So we need to be prioritizing infrastructure projects, as you said. I think the Greens broadly have been kind of poor on this, and I think we need to be more holistic. That's why I advocate joining the party so that we can kind of move them to be a little bit less singular focused on this and see things in the round where we say, well, no, actually, no, look, if we want to get people out of the planes, we need to get them into trains. If we want to get people out of their cars, we need to get them into trains. And that will involve, on a local level, investment in public transport like buses and trains. Good. Adrian Ramsey has already acknowledged that there too. Glad that he did. But if we want people out of planes on short-haul flights up to Scotland, we're going to need high-speed rail. We're going to need high-speed rail between London and Glasgow. Like, that's what we're going to need to have to do to be able to induce demand into cheap, into affordable, and into climate-friendly forms of transport.
I feel like for me anyway, he sort of evaded the question. I mean, the question was, why aren't you back in HS2? It's quite direct, and he didn't really talk about that. He did talk about more local transport. Again, like, we would agree. I trust the Greens to be excellent on local transport, right? I think they'll put the funding where it needs to go. But I think he evaded it. I don't think he said either, look, we don't believe in HS2 because of the issues with the local environment. It has I can't even say the bloody word. Basically, it can disrupt the local environment. Or, yes, we completely support HS2 because it's a big project. They didn't say that, and I think it just reflects the manifesto that on some things, when it comes to infrastructure, the Greens aren't either bold enough or they just don't simply believing it. Look, the Greens have a coalition between eco-socialists like us and, let's be honest, disaffected conservative voters who care about conservation. And I do think that's a really good coalition to have. But the problem is NIMBYism. I know in terms of policy, we want the Greens to be far better on infrastructure. But to sort of flip it on his head for a second, politically, then, is this actually the smart thing to do, to try and persuade potentially a wealth of new Tory voters who care about green spaces?
I mean, I think that it's definitely going to be good for them politically. I think that whilst we're in a moment where the Greens aren't going to really have any levers in terms of national policy because they have so few MPs, this is a fine compromise to make. And I've been clear about this. And actually, I think the big problem with Green NIMBYism happens on a council level and not on a national level. Actually, the planning policy and the manifesto is better than I expected. It was clearly had they consulted with planning experts on how to change the planning rules so that it becomes a little bit more, state focused, so that we can make sure that we have the infrastructure that we need if we do expand our cities and things like that. And they have promised to build council houses too. These are all fine, right? And it's the councils that kind of block things, because every council does this. Independent, Green, Conservative, Lib Dem, even Labour do these things too. And whilst there's not really like a scope for Green setting of policy in Westminster, this is a fine compromise to be able to make. But when the Greens get bigger, and if we want to change them into a party of government in how many years' time, don't know how many years this will take, but if we want to focus on this as a party of government in the future, that compromise will have to break eventually, because the working class relies on infrastructure, we rely on public investment, and we rely on amenities, especially in increasing population. And hopefully, internally, we can sell these conversations on this, especially as the climate crisis gets worse and as it gets far more pressing a concern. And we can say to these people exactly what I said, like, sure, I know you want to conserve the local environment around where you live. I get it. Whether we conserve it or not, it's still going to burn to a crisp if we don't deal with climate change. This is the bigger problem here.
And of course, the Green Party is a democratic party. So unlike any other political party, you can literally join it and help shape policy. This is not me shilling for them. I'm not a member of the Green Party. I'm going to stay away from political parties, actually. But that is a fact of the matter. The Greens are democratic. They decide a lot of their policies democratically for the grassroots. So I guess if you are more of an eco-socialist and you're not happy with the local NIMBYism or whatever, just join it. Now we have one last clip. Oh, do you know what? Bring it back in. Bring it back in. Sorry.
Really quick point is that if we want to be able to ensure that we have building like houses, for example, and expand housing to ensure that the housing crisis is solved, right? We can build like high density. I know people might not like this. I quite like high density, but it's cheap, it's affordable, and most people just want their housing costs to come down. They don't need a single family home. If we build things that are high density, we can still maximize green spaces. We can still ensure that we protect lots of habitats as well by not just doing huge urban sprawl, right? This isn't the only option that we have. It just has to be state directed. It has to be public housing, and the state has to plan these cities Soviet style, in my mind. Obviously not copying everything, but if we want to protect green spaces and have cheap, affordable public housing for working class people to live in, which doesn't affect the environment too much, this is what we've got to do.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But yes, we will move on. We have one last clip. This is Fiona Bruce questioning Ramsey on some of the statements Green candidates have made.
Let's just talk about some of your candidates. Adam Pugh, who's a candidate for Deptford and Lewisham North, he tweeted about Royal Navy vessels sailing to the Mediterranean to support Israel. Obviously, as we all know, there's a war going on there in Gaza. He said, I hope they sink. You've got Natalie Anderson. She's a candidate for Woking. She said online that this is a report anyway, that the 7/10 attacks, the October 7th attacks on Israel were orchestrated. You've got Simon Anthony. He's, again, a candidate of yours for Barking, compared Hamas to the French resistance. They're still candidates, so I assume you support their views.
I don't support any of those views that you've just outlined, Fiona, but I'll tell you what...
So why are they still candidates, then?
Well, if there have been concerns raised about particular candidates, as there have been with some of our candidates... I mean, these
concerns have been around for a good few weeks.
Then those concerns are properly investigated through the right channels inside the party. Those channels are separate from the party leadership, which is a matter of good governance, according to bodies like the EHRC.
So, but the election's only a week away.
There have been instances where there have been Green Party candidates who were selected, who are no longer going forward. 5 out of the 574 candidates across England and Wales. We have heard that, sadly, all parties have had candidates who were selected in this election that have no longer gone forward.
So you're saying, just to be clear for all of us, you've got a system in place. It's just under a week now to the election. These 3 people, with the views that they have expressed, reportedly online, hoping the Royal Navy vessels sink, comparing Hamas to the French resistance, whatever your process is, I mean, I've been reading about these people for some time, they are going to go ahead on next Thursday in your name, and you're happy with that?
Well, I can't comment on what all 574 candidates across the country are standing, and I'm not familiar with those 3. What I can say is that if issues have been raised, they're being investigated internally. There have been a number of occasions where candidates have been asked to take down posts and have done so, and there have been other cases where candidates have been asked to withdraw or have been withdrawn. But the general point that I'd make is that we live at a time when internationally we're seeing absolutely horrific scenes in Gaza with there's now well over 35,000 people who have lost their lives, aid not getting through, their homes being blown apart, just horrific scenes that we were seeing, just as the absolutely horrific attacks on Israel on the 7th of October and the resulting taking of hostages is completely unjustified, and I say that unequivocally. So what we need to be very aware of in talking about this is that there are Jewish communities and Muslim communities in the UK and around the world who are feeling very vulnerable at the moment. And all of us, and I'd say this to candidates of any party, need to be very aware of that when we're talking about this issue. But that won't stop me standing up and saying that the UK needs to play its role internationally in putting pressure for there to be a ceasefire from both sides, and in saying that it's absolutely unacceptable for the UK to continue selling arms to Israel when the International Criminal Court has been very clear that Israel, as well as Hamas, has broken international law.
Got to hand it to him. I thought that was a very, very good pivot there. Ended strong. But Helena, I mean, what do you make of his response? I guess it's hard to try and disavow every candidate whilst also trying to make the point that, look, some comments from Green members or anyone are due to anger over Israel, and whilst some are crass, they are making a political point. Obviously, the examples Bruce gave were not good, but there have been candidates who I don't think have said anything wrong yet have been targeted by the media. So, I mean, how do you think Adrian did there?
I think he was absolutely fine in his response there, making sure that if, we can obviously comment on individuals saying things, it's difficult, especially if you're a small party with a small amount of funding, grassroots funding as it is, because they have big donors like Labour and the Conservatives do, and a very small kind of party machine to be able to trawl through everybody's social media feeds to ensure that you're not putting candidates up who have said things that are off colour in the past. Just, if they want to retract it, especially like the comments saying, well, people are going to go and send ships off to help Israel. I hope they sink, right? Like, I don't hope anybody dies, right? I don't hope anybody loses their lives. But it's the kind of thing that you would say out of anger if you knew that your government was helping support a country committing an ethnic cleansing campaign, right? I think that's a basic level of justifiable visceral anger in response to our government's support of what Israel is doing in Gaza at that point. And so trying to say, well, we can comment all of these individual statements that have been made here, because at the end of the day, it's isolated incidents. But really, the really important point here is actually policy is what's important. Policy is what's important all the time. And again, like, compare this to the discussions of the kind of people who are Labour putting up as candidates at the election. Are they getting the same kind of scrutiny? Absolutely not. And there were plenty of other quotes that were brought up. The article they're referencing was from the Times. A bunch of stuff was just, this person is anti-Semitic because they said that the US and Israel were terrorists. And I'm like, you've just seen, it's like Israel today stealing homes off of people in the West Bank after executing people's families. I'm like, no, I'm sorry. Like, you can call Israel and America terrorists. That's absolutely fine. So it's clear that they want to be able to kind of paint the Greens as with the Corbyn brush like they did from 2015 to 2019 in the wake of the Israel-Gaza war. But what's interesting is that I don't think it will wash now. I think people have kind of woken up to this idea that criticism of Israel is not the same as anti-Semitism, and people are far more wary of these terms getting thrown about with less justification than is relevant. And so they're probably going to pay less attention than they did in 2016 to 2019. And the answer was fine. Let's just get around to the real brass tacks here. Our country is assisting a country credibly accused of war crimes. How about we don't do that? And people are justifiably angry.
Yeah, I think, look, normal people are angry, say, like I said, crass things, not particularly incorrect or, I don't know, a bit off the cuff. But people, I mean, unless you're one of those who come from the Labour students who know they're going to be Prime Minister from the age of 6, and they've got all their statements out correctly and making sure there's, no baggage. These are weird people. They're not normal. Normal people say shit all the time and are angry about stuff. And I think, look, it's okay to bring up and say, look, this candidate said this. I think it's good to hold people to account and make sure that you don't get really bad people slipping into power. But at the end of the day, I'm far more angry about our country who are complicit in war crimes and genocide. And I don't think the anger there is the balance isn't quite right. I say quite right, that's putting it politely. But we've got to move on again because, this is time is ticking. So we get on to the second story. A Channel 4 undercover documentary discovered racism and homophobia within the Reform Party. They documented an activist who said some pretty disgusting racist and anti-migrant things. And also an aide to Farage was filmed being homophobic. We have a clip of that now.
The immigration thing, use the word illegal, emphasise illegal, especially if you open the door with a bunch of sick mother. It's a cult. I tell you what, if you don't know about Islam, it's the most disgusting cult out. We're kicking all the Muslims out of the mosques and then turn them into Witherspoons. Yeah. I've always been a Tory voter. What annoys me is he got in. What's good is he? You tell me, he's just wet. What, Sunak? Useless. D11 and all the place near Dover, army recruitment, get the young recruits there, with guns on the beach, target practice, just shoot them. That's what the Greeks done. You know about that? The Greeks shot us. Look at the Australians. None of it. I just need to ring fence Bradford-Starn round and just do that. You've got these bastards running our country. You must be joking, mate. And do us a favour, you're a paramedic and in that not getting your ambulance, just don't put oxygen on the bastard, use something else. You know where I'm coming from.
So mate, look around. Proper England. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. Proper England. It's not like in London when you're a foreigner in your own country, and if you say hello to someone, they look like they're about to knife you in the face. You know what I mean? This is the shit I'm talking about. That is outrageous.
The car has a pride flag on its bonnet.
You see that degenerate flag on the front bonnet? What the old Bill doing promoting that crap? He should be out catching nonsense, not promoting the well, I suggest all our police officers go down to the local gay pride march and dance around like fairies for a few days at the taxpayers' expense.
Now, if you're saying anything against anyone, you're a racist or you're this, yeah? Then I'm a racist. I've had enough of it. Go across France and shoot the lot.
Really good documentary from Channel 4. You've just seen it. Really disgusting and deplorable stuff. And the guy, he's in the pub. He's like, do you know what? This is a proper pub, proper English. Sorry, but unless you serve a decent pint of Guinness, it's not a proper pub. These guys don't know what they're talking about. Now, we have a clip from Rishi Sunak responding to the racist comment.
When my two daughters have to see and hear Reform people who campaign for Nigel Farage calling me an effing packy, it hurts and it makes me angry, and I think he has some questions to answer. And I don't repeat those words lightly. I do so deliberately because this is too important not to call out clearly for what it is.
Helena, so what do you make of this story? Look, I know leaders don't have full control over everyone in the party, and we just spoke about Adrian Ramsey in the Green Party. He's not responsible for every Green member. Jeremy Corbyn wasn't responsible for every Labour member. However, given that Reform's political ideology is about division, it's about anti-immigration, Farage himself has been racist in the past, then we can't separate what these two individuals, and maybe more, have said from the party itself, right?
I mean, it's a difference, because remember, that guy, there's all these stories coming, I'm sure we'll get to it, about this, I forget what the name of the guy was, saying these are the things about Rishi Sunak, right? That's one guy who said a bunch of stuff. And again, you can't control individuals in your party. You've got to say what it says about your party if you attract them, especially given how much of their policy is around this particular area. But those other guys that we saw, those weren't just random people who signed up to canvass. Those are people who are more central to the party, literally comparing gay people to paedophiles in that statement. I mean, it sounds like that was the implication to me by saying, well, cops are dancing at pride marches, we should be arresting nonces, not promoting them. That sounds like an implication that by having people, having police officers from the queer community, that sounds pretty much like the kind of thing that's being said there. And these are people who are far more central to Reform UK's campaigning than just one guy who signed up to canvass or to be a candidate. So when you understand like the central project of the thing, you look at their policies. For example, their policies is just sending the boats back. Ben Habib, who was speaking to Julia Hartley-Brewer on Talk TV a few months back, basically admitted he's happy for migrants to drown in the Channel. And on top of that, their own manifesto, their contract with the people, is explicitly kind of queerphobic in the kind of way that it wants to essentially Section 35, so Section 38, the teaching about queer people from schools, and talking about, banning, essentially changing the law to essentially ban people from transitioning too. So this is a party that really doesn't like the queer community or indeed the migrant communities either, in terms of the kind of policies they talk about. And it's not just random candidates that say things like this too. It's people at the top of the party who say these things as well.
Now, with Rishi Sunak, obviously, look, what did you think of the response? For me, watching that clip, I can see he was actually personally affected. Now, dare I say, he showed some sort of humanity. And look, I've been called those words plenty of times in my life. So for once, I actually relate to what a billionaire is saying. But at the same time, I mean, Rishi Sunak happily took money from Frank Hester, didn't give the money back after his disgusting racist comments about Diane Abbott. And I would say the media, the BBC, are broadly biased towards the right. They pretty much made UKIP in Farage's career. However, at the same time, I don't think they have an issue sticking it to the likes of Reform when issues of racism come up, as they should. But what they won't do is talk about racism when it's targeted towards the left or if it's come from the Labour right. Would you agree with that analysis?
I mean, just look at the Kemi Badenoch comments about David Tennant saying, "Oh, I think he's racist because he said nasty things about me." Not even in kind of any contextually racist. Just I'm a black woman. He said nasty things about me. So they'll play the id poll card then. Yeah, Kemi Badenoch was also defending taking the money from Frank Hester after the clearly racist comments that he made about Diane Abbott, and said that the comments were trivial. If you can imagine such a thing as saying you hate all black women, or literally makes you want to hate all black women, that she should be shot, right? So it's clear that Tories will only play the identity politics game if they think that it's useful for them, and they don't even know how to do it properly either. It's clear a load of these times that they take a selective approach to caring about things like racism. And whilst I absolutely agree, I fundamentally will always side with Sunak when he is kind of pretty often subjected to kind of racist abuse and people discussing him like that he is not British just because he's of Indian heritage. I would find that repugnant, but I find that repugnant when anybody does it, not just when people do it to right-wingers.
What do you make a response from Reform then? I mean, there's been no apology or anything. In fact, I mean, Farage, on Question Time and subsequently Tice on Twitter, have been using excuses, saying that, well, the racist guy was a paid actor. And Farage even said, oh, it was a stitch-up. He even suggested that an agency may have potentially planted the guy, agency to Channel 4. I mean, they won't take any responsibility. And guess what? This ain't going to harm them in any way, is it?
I think it will harm them.
You think?
Slightly, okay. But not broadly, but slightly. But I think they should have been far more apologetic in their responses. But what's interesting is that they're very keen to focus on this guy they claim to be a paid actor. It could be, it could not be. What I don't think he is. But we also have the other comments caught on film from people much more senior in the party than he is. Right? It's not just him. It wasn't even mentioned for the pieces I've seen of the Nigel Farage Question Time.
No, they didn't. They
brushed it away as being a paid actor. They didn't mention the other guys that we also saw on camera, the younger people who are far more senior in the kind of party apparatus. They just gets ignored. It's completely ignored on top of that. So I think it's a really poor response from Farage and Tice. I think it will hurt them. So Luke Trill from More in Common does a lot of polling, a lot of focus groups. And whilst there is certainly a section of the public who doesn't mind these things being said. You've seen the responses from the people on the ground to these statements, that there's clearly a market for this. But this market isn't the entirety of Reform UK's vote share, or at least their polling share at the moment. Luke Troll made this. He made an estimation that there's like 10% of their 12 to 20% of the vote share that they've got at the moment. 10% of this is like dyed-in-the-wool people who think this rhetoric is fine. But there is a broad amount of people who just want to support them because they like Nigel Farage's tone. They're disaffected in terms of democracy, and he is straight talking. They like them on other policies such as the economy and small business. They are Tories who are disaffected and just want anybody else from the right wing to vote for. But these kind of comments are outside of what these people would deem to be acceptable, and I think that they are showing that they have an electoral ceiling here. Plenty of racists will vote for them, sure, whatever, right? Again, it's just like, people. Not everybody who votes for them is racist, but all racists do vote for them. I think is the kind of terminology that we'd use for this. But I think that there is a proportion of them that won't care, but there is certainly an amount of their polling who certainly will see this and get very much turned off.
I mean, I think this would become a problem for them. I nearly said when, but I might be right. When they become a party of governance, because they have to then win over a whole slew of people rather than their base. But I think right now they're riding the wave of their messed up form of right-wing populism. I don't think it's going to harm them. Now, of course, you have referenced data, and data is all that matters to me. So, of course, I'm happy to sort of be corrected on that. But I'm not sure I agree with you when you say they're finding their electoral ceiling. I think we could have said that about UKIP or maybe the Brexit Party, or we could have said that about Reform when they were hitting 5 to 8%, and we could say, oh, maybe they can get about 10% of the electorate. I mean, they're polling in some instances higher than the Conservatives. So again, how do we trust polls? I don't know, but I don't think there's a ceiling at the moment. And in fact, we've got the Conservative Party, pushing culture wars. They're becoming more like Reform. So I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't say that there's a ceiling, but again, I'm happy to be wrong on that. But we will have to move on, and let's get on to our next story. Now, we are going to still talk about racism, but this time from the Labour right. So I guess this ties in well. The Labour Party candidate Jovan Owusu-Nepal has been effectively silenced in his own constituency. Now, Jovan is standing in Clacton, which Farage is the favourite to win. He's been told by the party to essentially piss off. Labour has been accused of not putting up a fight against Nigel Farage in Clacton after the party's candidate was instructed to leave the constituency after distracting from Keir Starmer's campaign. Jovan Owusu-Nepal, 27, who works for Labour's Equalities team, was installed by the party last month to contest the seat, weeks before Farage changed his mind and decided to stand in the Essex constituency. Owusu-Nepal has since been seconded to the West Midlands, while the local campaign in Clacton said that it had banned from printing leaflets, blocked from using campaign software, and had access to the campaign's social media overridden with posts deleted on Twitter. Now, why would they do that? I mean, I personally think it's quite powerful to have a young black man standing against Farage. This guy is on the Labour's Equalities team, and it's a stark contrast between him and Farage. Look, a divisive and, yes, I think racist member of the political establishment, ex-Tory city banker whose entire political career has been based on bashing immigration, against a young, seemingly radical person of colour. So, why has he been effectively silenced? Well, if you didn't think Keir Starmer and the Labour right are a bunch of pathetic losers already, you certainly will now. Owusu-Nepal attracted attention on social media after he was photographed bumping into the Reform UK leader at an opening of a new food truck in Frinton earlier this month, with pictures going viral. A campaign source said Labour headquarters had been angry with the traction Owusu-Nepal was getting. At one point, Jovan was getting more retweets than Keir Starmer. The officials were furious with him and said he was distracting from Starmer's campaign, they said. Wow. Just wow. I mean, Keir Starmer couldn't handle a young black man taking the limelight off him. So they have effectively blocked Jovan. Really, really pathetic stuff. Helena, I want to get your thoughts on this. Embarrassing. Clearly, these people have issues of insecurity, but also maybe a racist element too.
I mean, I can't necessarily claim that this might specifically be due to racist opinions for these people. It certainly is it's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. Oh, you're getting too many retweets. You're overshadowing the dear leader, Sir Keir Starmer. Well, off to the West Midlands with you, not allowed to campaign in a really important seat, by the way, in Clacton. I think actually, as far as Labour candidates that have been imposed have gone, I think he's a nice guy. I would silver green, but whatever. I think he's a nice guy. Like, this is really kind of, it just shows you just how pathetic the Labour right thugs are. That it's not good enough to win the election. It's not good enough to win the election in a landslide. They have to have as many eyes on who they perceive to be as their leader, as their figurehead as possible. That any amount of people below them in the hierarchy who take away from the limelight. No, that's too good. That's too much. No, sorry, we can't do that. We can't refocus the campaign away from Keir Starmer's march to number 10. Then we can indeed speak about somebody in just one constituency in the country, because it's important, I guess, that talking about the impact of trying to actually fight fascism when it comes to. I'm not saying that Nigel Farage necessarily is one, but this nationalism that we're seeing in UK politics, he's certainly the figurehead of it, which could be the point at which that could sprout in the future. And having these campaigners on the ground is super important. Do I think the Labour Party has a problem with racism? Well, of course it does. We've all seen what's happened with all of the black members of Parliament who wouldn't give their name to Channel 4 because they thought they would lose the whip. Faiza Shaheen losing her candidacy for talking about Islamophobia in the party. And of course, Martin Ford getting gagged, or was threatened to be gagged by the Labour Party for criticising them too much after they took his report and put it in the fucking bin. So does Labour Party have racism issues? Absolutely. Is this necessarily an instance of it? I don't know. But clearly they need to be treating the members of colour in the Labour Party with far more respect than they're treating them at the moment.
I understand why we could be hesitant to say this is specifically a racist issue, and I think that's fair, because there's not enough evidence of it. But I think it's clear, as you just pointed out, there is a big pattern of blocking people of colour. Like I said, Diane Abbott, which I know she has the whip, but let's be honest, there was a concerted effort to get rid of her. Faiza Shaheen, Martin Ford. I mean, Martin Ford obviously wasn't a candidate, but for everyone watching, most of you are aware he was commissioned to do the full report by Keir Starmer and found there was issues of anti-black racism, weaponisation of anti-Semitism. There was leaked documents that showed a visceral hatred of Diane Abbott. And after, let's be honest, the leadership didn't like what they found, Martin Ford has been essentially silenced. And even he said he received emails which are almost threatening. So I think you're right. It's not just about having a Labour majority. It's about bullying these people too. I mean, look, they're going to win. I don't know why they thought that they should get rid of Jobin. I think maybe it started off because he wrote an article saying, I'm speaking for every person of colour here, which Nigel Farage said, oh, it's racist, but obviously not. I mean, he's a person of colour. People of colour still face institutional racism, everyday racism, and I think it's fine when a candidate says that. But of course, apparently the reason is because of tweets. It just shows how fragile these people are. But we're going to move on again. But let's go to some of our comments. Stanley Beckett, paid actor, a touch of Alex Jones, Sandy Hook there, which Farage has been on within the last year. I guess so. I mean, look, it'd be very hard to compare the two right now because Sandy Hook is a monumentous scandal. Of course, Alex Jones is pretty much bankrupt from it. I can see what you're saying. And it is possible it could be a paid actor. I don't buy it. But I understand the sentiments there of right-wing populism basically taking no responsibility for themselves. Let's go to another comment. Beckett A, hello again. I'll never forget that poster with frog face Farage in front of refugees. So much smug hatred, no shame. They are misogynist, homophobic and transphobic. Correct you are. And again, that poster was absolutely deplorable. Let's go to another comment. Again, hello. So sick of hearing we don't belong. We need to go back to where? Who knows? Only valuing immigrants for the industry gaps they feel is cold. I think that's actually a really good point. I think maybe liberals and potentially leftists can fall in that trap. But again, I suppose it's trying to sell the immigration policy. I personally love hearing people say, I feel like immigration has enriched our culture. and we do get into the trap of, well, we need immigration because it's filling gaps. I absolutely understand it gets a bit cold, but it's a very difficult thing to sell. We are in a country which I think in terms of economic policy, probably quite left-leaning. When it comes to social policy, like, I don't know, crime and immigration, we're a bit more conservative. But I understand your sentiment. Let's go to another comment. Stephen Calder, Starmer's racist scapegoating of Bangladeshi community was quite deliberate because it was repeated by John Ashworth. I almost have no words how disgusting their comments were, deplorable, which we even saw a recent poll now, which is among Bangladeshi people, where I think Labour have dropped by 30 points and the Greens have picked up 30 points. So there's obviously a huge shift there when it comes to ethnic minorities. Again, unfortunately, Labour are going to be winning a stonking majority, it seems, even with their support going down, but that doesn't mean it's going to be very successful for them to stay in power. But let's move on. Now, if you enjoy what we're doing, it's important to point out that all of this is still voluntary. We have multiple people working on these shows. We have a producer in the background, of course, myself and others who will be hosting, have been hosting until the election, and our amazing guests. So we would really appreciate that you subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you share our content, and if you can support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 per month. Now, the goal is to become a fully funded media organisation where people can dedicate their time to turn left with a wage. Now, let's get on to our final story. Now, we've all seen various polls. Sometimes we can't help but get worked up about them, but then we tend to remind ourselves not to take all of them too seriously. However, there has been some polling recently that has shown the Liberal Democrats becoming the official opposition. We have one from YouGov. This poll puts Labour on a majority of 244, with the Lib Dems in second with 93 seats. Reform would win a huge 17% of the vote with only 2 seats. We have a projection from Stats for Lefties using the data from Electoral Calculus, which puts Labour on an even bigger majority of 342, and the Lib Dems second with 94 seats. And we have another projection, this time using Redfield and Wilton, that has Labour with a 332 majority and the Lib Dems on 80. Now, I have a pretty big burning hatred for the Liberal Democrats. I mean, they were in coalition with the Tories that instituted austerity. They U-turn on tuition fees. They are a party not to be trusted. However, is there a case for a tactical vote for the Lib Dems? Now, I'm sure people watching might groan at that, but my logic here is surely removing the Tories as opposition is a really, really good thing. That would mean a seismic shift in politics that we haven't seen since Labour overtook the Liberals 100 years ago. Now, the Lib Dems are currently to the left of Labour. It's plausible they would attack Labour from its left. No matter how right-wing Labour becomes, the Tories will do its best to move them even further to the right. Now, even if the Lib Dems pivoted on their policies and they did attack Labour from its right, I think one thing is pretty certain: they won't push the culture wars like the Tories have. Now, I know it's a low bar, but if we had an opposition to Labour's transphobic policies, if they played a role as sort of the US Democrats talking about social progressivism, that is surely better than what we have now. Now, I want to stress, I don't think people should vote Lib Dem up and down the country. I think people should vote Green or Independent. But what about seats where the only party that could beat Labour or the Tories are the Lib Dems? Helena, I want to ask you first, how realistic of a chance do you think the Lib Dems could become the opposition? Do you think that Reform have a better chance of being the largest party or second largest party? And do you think there is some utility in tactically voting for the Lib Dems in some seats?
So to answer your first question, yes, I think the Liberal Democrats will be the opposition. Looking at the current polling, I think the Tories are now consistently, across multiple pollsters, most reputable ones as well. Like Opinion, I think they have a methodology that favours the Tories too much. But across places like YouGov and Find Out Now, Redfield and Wilton, Techney, and all these places, discounting like people polling and the crap ones, the vast majority of these are now showing the Tories on 19-20%. And this is literally electoral wipeout territory. And their vote is really spread out. It's not centralised. The disaffection and dissatisfaction with the Conservatives has spread throughout their voter base in every single sector of society, in every seat across demographics. These are MRP polls showing but this is very fragmented now. And they don't have like this strong vote base in single seats to be able to not lose when the left are very happy to tactically vote, or the liberal side of the equation are very happy to tactically vote, and the right just aren't. They're not tactically voting at all. They're happy to let Reform UK play spoiler. So I genuinely think the Liberal Democrats are a favourite now to be the official opposition over the Conservative Party. That electoral calculus poll, that using the stats for Lefty's prediction, how the Lib Dems on 80 seats and the Tories on 3 seats, that was 20,000 people surveyed in that. 20,000. That's, and an MRP poll, that's 10 times the size of the normal polls that you see. They're usually 1,000, 2,000 people. This is a really kind of high quality, low variance poll that we're seeing that shows the Tories on 15%, 1 point ahead of the Liberal Democrats. Now, I understand we see a breadth of polling here and we need to average these things out. But on average, the Tories are now below 20%. Like, it's complete electoral devastation territory for them. And the don't knows are also going to non-Conservative Party voters as well. When you poll people who say they don't know, they're more likely to go to Labour and Lib Dem and Reform UK than they are the Conservative Party. I genuinely believe these polls. To answer your second question, do I think we should tactically vote for the Liberal Democrats? Yeah, I think we should. It really pains me to say it. It really infuriates me that I have to say this. But in Lib Dem Conservative marginal seats, I think that specifically on policies for people that we here on the left care about, like we care about the people who really need the help when governments leave them behind. Asylum seekers are one of these people, one of these groups of people, and it's clear asylum policy is going to be a really important part of the next 5 years as we move on, as the migration crisis gets worse and worse, as climate change and wars break out across the world. If we have both the main party and the opposition party essentially being anti-asylum seeker in the way that Labour and the Conservatives are, this is going to be terrible for fomenting a national consensus of cruelty to asylum seekers. The Liberal Democrats are clear we need safe and legal routes. They're clear we need to show at least some amount of compassion, despite all the Thatcherism that they otherwise support and the austerity that they're handmaidens for their years in part of the coalition. I think that 5 years of the Liberal Democrats being on every panel show and the Conservatives only being on some of them, the Liberal Democrats always asking the questions in Parliament and the Conservatives only asking sometimes. I think this, I agree for once with Phil Morehouse from A Different Bias. This could literally change the course of history if the zeitgeist is allowed to be set just by the Lib Dems and Labour politically and culturally and within the media, by having the Conservative Party shut out. And I think that is worth holding our noses and supporting the Lib Dems in what few constituencies we know is necessary. Because again, this isn't going to be everywhere. It's going to be a very small number of constituencies where it's worth doing this. But where it is worth doing it, the utility, the opportunity cost is so low and the gains are so high, I think it's not an opportunity we should pass up.
I agree. And yes, I don't often agree with Phil either, but I think he's right. I think this is a seismic political disruption. Right, I referenced it earlier when the Labour Party overtook the Liberals. I mean, this is quite funny, actually. The Liberals are making a comeback. But I think it's really important because when I vote, I obviously vote for the policies. I vote for what I think about the local constituency. But a lot of the time, I vote for the national narrative. I think it's important shifting political debates. And I think despite the fact that the Lib Dems, let's say they become the opposition, and they only get 80 seats. Of course, that's far behind the Labour Party. It won't mean as much in terms of legislative power, but what it does mean is they are the official opposition. The media will obviously call them the official opposition. They will be platformed more. And of course, they will get their 6 questions, and Ed Davey becomes the opposition leader. I think that's huge. I think that really is big. And I do think that looking at the Lib Dem manifesto, again, we can't completely trust them. I think they are way to the left. I don't think they're particularly left-wing, but they're way to the left of the Labour Party. And if they just fought on that manifesto to drag Labour to the left, I think that's a good thing. I think it could potentially renew a huge wealth of progressive politics. Maybe there's a sort of rainbow coalition. I know we've talked about that for so long, but I actually think there's a possibility if the Lib Dems are the opposition. And actually, I do feel like looking at these polls, a sigh of relief, because I was expecting 10 years of managed decline. We've had it 14 years from the Tories. We're going to get it from the Labour Party and the Keir Starmer. Kind of all hope has left my body. Looking at that and the idea that the Liberal Democrats could become the opposition, I actually do feel like a little bit of hope there. Not because I particularly think the Lib Dems are great or anything, but I think the national zeitgeist and the seismic shift it happens, it will make history. But I would love to know what people think. Please let us know in the comments and on future videos. But that is all we have for tonight. We were running slightly late. I do apologise, but we've kept it tight. We kept it going. I want to thank everyone who tuned in. I hope you enjoyed tonight. I'd also, of course, like to thank Helena for joining me tonight. Make sure you subscribe to her on YouTube. Go to youtube.com/NoJusticeMTG. The link is in the description. And you can also follow her on Twitch, which is with the same name. I believe she is now streaming still, actually. So once this finishes, please go over and watch her live. You can catch us here this Monday at the same time of 7:30 p.m. And also, if you haven't seen the announcement already, Turn Left is covering the election results live as they come in. We're going live from 9 p.m. until 9 a.m. election day, which is ambitious, especially since we only started doing live shows 6 weeks ago. I believe Helena will also be doing a live stream too. So make sure you support all independent left-wing media on election night. You can flick back and forth. Or if you're hardcore and have multiple devices, you can stream multiple different shows. We will have a whole host of different guests throughout the nights, and I'm sure there will be a crossover between Helena and Turn Left. So make sure you get your snacks, get your beer or coffee at the ready. I'm Curtis Daly. Thank you, and see you next time.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.